Welcome back to Things That Are Harder. Today we're going to move outside of my comfort zone and we're going to talk about audio and music. Because I've never worked in this field, we're going to have to stay pretty high level, but I think there's still some stuff to talk about. When you have a video game, for the most part, there are really only two senses you're interacting with, and those are sight and sound. Now, these days, you're starting to see more and more haptic feedback in games, but it's not common, and even when it's present, it's at best a background piece of information. Audio is an opportunity to provide just as much information to the player as the visual landscape, or at least close to that much. Audio isn't just about completing the soundscape. It can also be used as part of your user experience to tell them what's going on, to make them pay more attention, but also, as I've talked about in previous videos, audio is critically important to help set the mood. So I'm going to give you two examples about that. So first, let's take a look at these puppies here. Very cute. But do they remain cute if I do this? Not quite so cute, huh? By the way, that tone is called a shepherd's tone, which your brain interprets as a constantly rising tone that just keeps dialing the tension up forever, because even though it's impossible for the tone to be rising forever, that's how your brain is interpreting it. It just feels it rising and rising and grinding and grinding. Just so you don't hate me, I'm going to see if I can undo that with the puppies. So I'll do one more piece with the puppies and we'll try a different soundscape. Okay, I imagine a real audio engineer could have done a lot better than that, but you kind of get the point. The same clip 3 times, 3 different soundscapes. The first one actually has nothing, and you get 3 different moods coming across. On the flip side, what if I take a much scarier scene and undermine it with something silly? Sort of sucks some of the scariness out of it, doesn't it? Now, if I layer a scary scene with scary music on top of each other, then you get something that's more like this. Now, we shouldn't actually be afraid of sharks, but a lot of people are, so I think the point still stands. Now, when you're using audio in your gameplay, it can provide a very important additional channel to provide information, where you can tell the player how things are going from the perspective of their health. You often get heartbeats as players get close to death, or tell them what's going on around them. Audio in video games is different than visuals in video games for a couple of reasons. So first of all, you can provide audio from all around the player, behind them, off to the side, behind something, because audio moves differently and you hear things outside of your visual frame. Additionally, just from a pure hardware setup, not very many of your players are playing your game in true 3D. They don't have a VR headset on. Unless you're making a VR game, they're not playing it in actual 3D. They're looking at a 2D screen. Then you're providing that artificial recreation of depth in that experience. But audio is different. If you're making an HD game, a fairly large percentage of your players players are going to be playing with headphones on or playing with a surround sound system. So for them, the audioscape is actually in 3D, and you can position sounds in the environment accurately, and they can actually pick out where they are. So that's a channel of information that you have when you play a sound that's not really available to you when you are putting a picture on the screen. Now, for a mobile game, not very many people are going to be playing with headphones, and you're dealing with a little tiny speaker. And you do still have to remember that a non-insignificant number of your players are going to be playing your game through these speakers on their television. But you can and should take advantage of the fact that for audio setups, true 3D audio is a thing that you can do, and many of your players will be able to take advantage of it. But you do have to remember that you can't use audio as your only informational channel, because some of your players may have hearing troubles, or they're playing in environments where they have the audio turned off. This is particularly true with mobile games, where a lot of your players, maybe even a majority, might be playing with their audio turned off. And I'm sure for an audio designer that's incredibly frustrating, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't take the opportunity to improve the experience for those players that are playing with the audio. As I said, audio can deliver some information more efficiently, more accurately than a visual cue all by itself, or even a visual cue can at all. So you shouldn't ignore this second channel to provide additional information. But you do have to remember that if it's critical information, that players without audio still need access to that information. So take advantage, improve the experience, provide more information, but it can't be the only channel for critical information. One of the things that I've probably spent the most time trying to get a good solution for is audio for dialogue. In movies, dialogue is usually mixed into the center channel. So in a 5:1 audio setup, the center channel is the channel that sits in the middle between the front speakers, and it gives you a very clear place to put the audio. And even if you're listening on headphones or whatever, putting it in the center channel makes it very clear. But in video games, or at least in Bioware video games, where you have a party that's participating in banter, those people who are talking are actually often behind the player. So do you put that banter dialogue through the center channel even still? And this has been a point of discussion with me in the audio department, I think on every game that I've worked on. My feeling is that if you have to kind of cut the difference on this, you want that sound to be positioned in the world, but you also need it to remain clear. So I think that you can mix some of it into the center channel, make sure that it's understandable, but also allow some of it to come through from a positional space. I do think this is definitely open to opinion, and if you listen to the E3 React that I just released, you'll notice that the banter that's occurring there is actually very positional, and as a result, it kind of feels weirdly anchored in the world when you're listening to it, which is kind of what you want, but it also results in one of the weird habits of hardcore Bioware players, which is to stop moving and turn around anytime any banter starts, because they want to make sure that they get the best audio experience possible. So knowing that players are doing that, doesn't it make sense to accommodate them to some degree to get a better play experience for them by maintaining the understandability of that banter? To argue for this more artificial placement of banter, you should understand that the party that's behind you is performing all kinds of shenanigans. They are getting stuck on things, they are teleporting to get back into position, they are talking to each other when they're not even very close to each other. And if you have overly spatially anchored banter, it's going to really draw attention to the fact that this is happening. In fact, I think it's worth to do a bit of an example here. If I have person 1 talking to person 2, and they're just coming through a central mono channel
like this, well, it's pretty clear, right?
But if I have person 1 way over here,
and person 2 is way over there,
that sounds pretty weird, or at least
it sounds weird if you're currently wearing headphones or listening to this
on a stereo system. And even weirder If I have person one talking and giving a really long monologue, and in the middle of this monologue, they suddenly teleport from one extreme side of the sound setup to the other, that sounds really, really weird, doesn't it? Now, I'm only dealing with a stereo audio setup here. In your actual game mix, chances are you've got a full surround setup, so they can actually be moving in space even more extremely, and you don't really want to draw attention to the things that you're doing. So sometimes correctness isn't the right answer, because correctness of one thing is going to draw attention to the incorrectness of another thing. I've talked about this a little bit in the past with other topics, but really with any discipline, you need to be aware of your localized correctness sometimes is not the right answer, and sometimes the right thing to do is to accept something a bit more artificial because it allows the overall experience to be more correct. Something else you need to consider when designing your audio is audio prioritization. So 2 things here. There's usually a maximum number of sounds you can play at once, and you should have your sounds sorted so that when you run out of sound spots, the least important things are the ones that stop playing. This is usually done through channels. Chances are your audio engine already has support for different channels with different prioritization. You just need to figure out how to take advantage of it. But also, there's a maximum number of sounds you want to play. If there are hundreds of sounds playing all at once, you're just getting noise and you've stopped communicating anything to the player other than, man, there sure is a lot going on. So prioritization allows you to start to cull away the less important things when more important things start happening. Ducking is where you actually push the volume down of lesser sounds in the mix so that you can make sure that the very important thing that just started happening is heard by the player. If you have a very important piece of gameplay, like a missile is coming and they get to hear the countdown, you might want to duck the rest of the sounds so that countdown sound isn't missed. Similarly, with banter and other information passing audio, you definitely want to make sure that the rest of the soundscape is staying out of the way so that it can be understood. Does that necessarily mean you should duck the rest of the audioscape? Not necessarily, but it is a tool in your toolbox to keep in mind. Certainly, movies do this all the time, where the thunderstorm retreats into the background when the important emotional conversation starts happening. It's still there, it's not gone, but it's lowered in volume and lowered its presence in the audioscape so you can follow the conversation that's going on. I think there is a lot to be learned from audio mixing in movies for games, but you always have to remember that games aren't movies. The player is in control of where the camera is, what they're looking at, so you always have to take that into account. In a movie, you can really emphasize one specific thing in a scene with the audio mix. In a game, at least in the interactive parts of the game, you usually can't do that because the player is determining what's important in the scene, not you. And while you can emphasize different things more or less, you have to understand that they're kind of in control of what they care about in the moment. It's the same reason why depth of field is massively used more in movies than in games, because in movies, you get to decide what the viewers are looking at, whereas in games, that's often not the case. Music in games is so important. It is one of the major ways you set the tone of the game. It can be used to help characterize different characters because you have specific themes for different people in your world. It can help set the tension or remove tension when that's appropriate. It fills the game with life when otherwise that might not be possible. Video game music, like soundtracks in movies, can often be a feature that sits in that unnoticeable section between bad and good. You notice bad music in a video game or in a movie. And you notice when it's excellent. But often the purpose is to retreat into your subconscious and enhance your emotional experience without you even really being consciously aware that it's there. In open world games, however, you have to be careful because the experience isn't quite so focused. So if you have music playing constantly in the open world, you're going to wear that piece of music very thin very quickly. So while something like Super Mario Brothers has a song playing all the time, very anchored into the experience, something like Skyrim or The Witcher tends to move their music down and even completely out of the experience to give the exploration room to breathe and to make sure that the music stays fresh in the player's mind and doesn't wear out its welcome. One opportunity you have in open world games, in games that have exploration, is diegetic music. So diegetic music is music that is anchored in the actual space. Maybe you walk by a radio, or you go into a tavern where live music is playing, or there are very musical birds in your environment. This gives you an opportunity to underscore and anchor your music, giving more life to the world, while also making that music matter more to the experience that the player is having. And if you're lucky, your diegetic music can be thematically linked to your overall soundtrack, so the entire thing knits into a singular experience. This is going to depend on your setting and your choices when it comes to your music, but it is an opportunity that's available to some games. You have the same number of ears as eyes, so you need to treat audio as an important part of your game development. It enhances or undermines the emotional tone of what is happening in the game at any moment. It can be used to convey information and supplement the signals being given to the player visually. And overall, a game without audio is usually very incomplete. As I said, I've never worked in audio, so I suspect there are some audio engineers that can tell me in the comments how I got this all wrong. Special thanks to my members. They help keep this channel running. If you're interested in becoming a member, there's a link down in the description. I'm going to do a few more of these things that are harder videos on topics that are outside my comfort zone. So if you have things you would like me to hit upon that you know I don't know anything about, let me know down in the comments. I will do my best. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up so that the YouTube algorithm know that you did enjoy it. Share it with someone you think would find it interesting. I will see you again soon. Thank you.